The most dangerous volcano in America is not Yellowstone, it is not the caldera under Mammoth Lakes, and it is not the giant that everybody points to on a map. It is a broken, flat-topped mountain in southwest Washington state that stands only 8,363 feet tall, and it is dangerous for one very simple reason. It has already done it once, and right now it is refilling. Beneath Mount St. Helens, seismometers have been recording something that has not happened on this scale since the last eruption there ended in 2008. In one recent stretch, the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network located about 368 earthquakes under that mountain in less than 5 months. In another stretch, more than 400. At the peak, 38 located earthquakes in a single week. Beneath a volcano that, in the years after 2008, averaged roughly 11 located earthquakes per month. The United States Geological Survey has a specific word for what that pattern usually means, and the word is recharge. Today we are going to break down exactly what is going on beneath Mount St. Helens, where it is most dangerous and whether things could get even worse. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever personally felt an earthquake, or lived through an ash fall, or watched a river rise in a place where it never should have risen? Tell me where you were and what it felt like. If you want to be the first to know every time something major happens, subscribe. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Now let us get into it. Start with the record itself, because the record is the story. On July 15th, 2023, the counters at the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network began to climb. Over the following 3.5 months, more than 400 earthquakes were located beneath Mount St. Helens. In late August and early September of that year, the network was locating 40 to 50 events per week. The largest of them, on August 27, 2023, was a magnitude 2.4. To put that in context, a magnitude 2.4 is a quake most people standing directly above it would never feel. It is not a disaster, it is a signal, and the signal is only meaningful when you compare it against the mountain's own baseline. Since the end of the 2004 to 2008 eruption, Mount St. Helens had settled into a quiet rhythm of about 11 located earthquakes per month. 40 to 50 in a week is not a doubling, it is roughly a 10-fold jump. On October 30th, 2023, the Cascades Volcano Observatory published an information statement. The language was deliberately calm. Seismicity was elevated. It remained within the normal range of background. There were no signs of an imminent eruption. The alert level stayed at normal, the aviation color code stayed at green. That episode faded, then it came back. Beginning February 1st, 2024, the network located approximately 368 more earthquakes beneath the volcano through June 21st. More than 95% of them were smaller than magnitude 1.0, far too small to be felt at the surface by anyone. The number located per week peaked in early June at 38 events. The largest event of the entire sequence was a magnitude 2.0 on May 31st, 2024. And here is the number that matters most, the one that turns a trivia statistic into a genuine story. Those earthquakes were occurring at a median depth of about 3.5 miles below sea level, which works out to roughly 4.6 miles below the floor of the crater. They were not happening in the crater, they were happening under the plumbing, and it is worth being clear about what the word located actually means there, because it changes how you read every number in this video. A located earthquake is not simply a wiggle on a screen, it is an event recorded by enough separate seismometers in enough separate places for analysts to solve for exactly where it happened and how deep. Mount St. Helens is one of the most heavily instrumented volcanoes on Earth, ringed with seismic stations, which means events far too small for any human being to feel are still captured, timed, and pinned to a point in 3 dimensions. That density is the only reason a magnitude 0.5 under this mountain becomes a data point at all. On most of the planet, an earthquake that's small simply happens and nobody ever knows it did. Here, it gets a depth, a time, and a permanent place in the record. So when the count climbs, scientists are not sensing a mood. They are watching a measured rate change in a system they have been reading continuously for more than 40 years. On June 18, 2024, the USGS put the comparison in writing. Those 2 periods in 2023 and in 2024 represented the largest short-term increase in earthquake rates at Mount St. Helens since the last eruption ended in 2008. That is where the title of this video comes from, and it is worth being precise about it, because precision is the entire point. Shaking like never before, in the strict sense, is not true. Longer sequences with far more events occurred at this volcano between 1988 and 1992, again between 1995 and 1996, and again between 1997 and 1999. What is true is narrower and stranger. Nothing since the eruption stopped has looked like this. And as of the most recent Cascades Volcano Observatory weekly update, dated August 14, 2026, every volcano in the Cascade Range of Oregon and Washington remains at normal background activity levels. Small earthquakes were detected during that week at Mount Rainier, at Mount St. Helens, at Mount Hood, and at Newberry, all monitoring data consistent with background. Alert level normal. Color code green. So the mountain is not erupting, and nobody is telling you it is about to, but something is moving under it, and it is worth understanding exactly what. Here is the mechanism, and it is simpler than most people expect. Mount St. Helens is fed by magma that forms near the base of the crust, at a depth of roughly 16 miles. That magma is buoyant, so it rises slowly through the lower crust. It does not travel in a single pipe like a straw. It works its way upward through a network of cracks and conduits, and it accumulates in a reservoir sitting about 2.5 to 6 miles below sea level. Now think about what happens when new magma arrives in a reservoir that is already full. The pressure inside goes up. That pressure pushes outward on the surrounding rock. Rock is strong, but it is not infinitely strong, and it is already threaded with old fractures. When the stress crosses the threshold, those fractures slip. Each slip is a tiny earthquake. Geologists call these volcano-tectonic earthquakes, and that name tells you exactly what they are. They are tectonic in behavior, rock breaking against rock, but volcanic in cause. The stress driving them is coming from below, from fluid being forced through cracks by a pressurizing system. That entire process has a name: recharge, the arrival of additional magma into the upper reservoir, and that explains every strange feature of the data. It explains why the earthquakes are so small, because you do not need much energy to slip a fracture that is already close to failure. It explains why they cluster at depths of 3 to 4 miles below sea level instead of at the surface, because that is where the reservoir is. It explains why the rate rises and falls in pulses over months, rather than building smoothly, because magma does not arrive on a schedule. But here is the part that most headlines leave out entirely, and it is the single most important sentence in this video. Recharge is not eruption. High rates of seismicity interpreted as recharge have been observed in the past at Mount St. Helens and at other volcanoes around the world, and they can continue for many years without an eruption. We are not guessing about that. We have a direct case study at this exact volcano. Between 1987 and 2004, Mount St. Helens went through repeated recharge sequences: the 1988 to 1992 run, the 1995 to 1996 run, the 1997 to 1999 run. Every one of them was larger in duration and event count than what has been recorded recently, and none of the sequences in the 1980s and 1990s directly led to an eruption. The magma arrived, it stacked, it pressurized the rock cracked, and then things went quiet again. The volcano did erupt eventually, from 2004 through early 2008, but that was a slow, dome-building eruption that pushed a lava dome up into the crater. It was not a repeat of what happened in 1980. That distinction matters because when scientists tell you the volcano is refilling, most people hear one thing. They hear 1980, and that is not what the science is saying at all. But you cannot understand the stakes here without going back to that morning, because 1980 is the reason this mountain sits so high on the national threat list in the first place. May 18th, 1980. 8:32 in the morning, Pacific time. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck directly beneath Mount St. Helens. The mountain had been bulging outward on its north flank for weeks, pushed by magma intruding at shallow depth, and that earthquake was enough. The entire north face let go at once. What followed was one of the largest landslides ever recorded in human history, roughly 3.3 billion cubic yards of mountain sliding away. And when the flank collapsed, it uncorked the pressurized system underneath, the way taking the cap off a shaken bottle does. The blast went sideways, not up. 57 people were killed. The mountain lost more than 1,300 feet of elevation in a matter of minutes. Hundreds of square miles of forest were buried or flattened. Spirit Lake, sitting at the mountain's northern foot, was slammed by debris. Its surface area nearly doubled to about 2,200 acres, and its only outlet to the North Fork Toutle River was buried under as much as 600 feet of rubble. If you follow Pacific Northwest news at all, that name probably already rings a bell, and we will come back to it, because Spirit Lake is where this story ends. But here is the part almost nobody remembers about that day, and it is the reason the next section of this video exists. The blast killed the people. The mud took the infrastructure. Enormous mud flows, what geologists call lahars, poured off the mountain and into the Toutle River, then into the Cowlitz, then roughly 60 miles downstream into the Columbia River itself. They destroyed hundreds of bridges, homes, and buildings on the way. And overnight, they choked the Columbia River shipping channel, dropping it from a working depth of roughly 40 feet to about 14 feet, leaving cargo ships aground in the middle of the navigation channel. For 9 miles up and down the river, nothing moved but mud and water. Shipping on one of the most important waterways in the western United States stopped for about a week. And the response gives you the scale better than any single statistic can. Over the years that followed, the Army Corps of Engineers dredged so much material out of the Tutli, the Cowlitz, and the Columbia that spread out it would cover a 12-lane highway 1 foot deep from New York City to San Francisco. They raised the dikes at Longview, at Kelso, at Castle Rock, and built a new one at Lexington. They were not doing that because they feared a second eruption. They were doing it because the first one was still arriving, one river season at a time. That is the most counterintuitive fact about this volcano, and it is the thing almost nobody outside Southwest Washington fully understands. A volcanic eruption is an event. A volcanic sediment problem is a condition. The event lasted a morning. The condition is 46 years old, and it is still being managed with heavy machinery every single year. The difference between the volcano's power and the region's suffering was not luck, it was physics. Fine, water-saturated volcanic debris behaves like wet concrete, and it travels far, far further than anyone standing on a hillside would ever expect, and once it stops, it stays. From the eruption in 1980 through September 30th, 2018, the Toutle River carried a total of about 405 million tons of sediment down into the lower Cowlitz. To put that in context, that is enough material to bury downtown Portland, Oregon to a depth of 300 feet. So what are scientists actually watching now, and where does the real exposure sit? Start with the mountain itself. The Cascades Volcano Observatory and the University of Washington's Pacific Northwest Seismic Network monitor Mount St. Helens continuously, and the things that would genuinely change the picture are specific and knowable. Not deep, small, scattered earthquakes, which is what recharge looks like. What would matter is a migration of those earthquakes upward, from 3 or 4 miles below sea level toward the crater floor. What would matter is deformation, the ground surface visibly swelling as it did before 1980. What would matter is a change in gas output, particularly sulfur dioxide, or the appearance of continuous volcanic tremor rather than discrete individual events. None of those signals is currently being reported. That is why the alert level is still normal. Now keep an eye on the valley below too, because that is where the ledger has genuinely shifted. The 1980 debris avalanche did not vanish. Billions of cubic yards of it are still sitting in the upper North Fork Toutle River Valley, loose, unconsolidated, and eroding a little more every winter. Excluding the eruption year itself, from October 1980 through September 2018, the Toutle River moved more than 248 million tons of sediment downstream, an average of about 6.5 million tons every single year. To hold that back, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built a sediment retention structure on the North Fork Toutle in the late 1980s, a dam roughly 125 feet tall whose only job is to catch volcanic debris before it reaches the towns. Between 1988 and 2013, it trapped more than 115 million cubic yards. And here's the problem: it is filling up. According to the Corps, that structure has shifted from catching about 80% of the sediment passing through it to allowing about 80% to pass. That is a complete reversal of function. It has saddled river communities with millions of dollars in annual maintenance. It has begun filling in the Corps' own Columbia River deepwater shipping channel again, and river leaders say it has worsened recent flooding along the Cowlitz. The dam was last raised in 2013. As of early 2026, the Corps is moving to raise it again. Then there is Spirit Lake. After the outlet was buried in 1980, the lake had nowhere to drain, and it started to rise. If it had overtopped that debris blockage, the resulting failure could have sent a catastrophic mud flow down toward Toutle, Castle Rock, Kelso, and Longview. So in 1985, the Corps drove a tunnel 1.6 miles through a ridge to drain it. Before that tunnel existed, the only thing holding the situation together was a set of pumps mounted on barges, running from 1982 onward, physically lifting water out of the lake and over the blockage because there was no other way to stop it climbing. That was the emergency stopgap. The tunnel was supposed to be the permanent answer. And that tunnel has worked. Spirit Lake has never exceeded its designated maximum safe operating elevation. But the ridge it runs through is not stable. 12 faults and shear zones squeeze and buckle the tunnel, and it has required major repairs in 1995 and 1996, and again from 2015 into 2016. Every time it closes for repair, the lake climbs. During one closure in the winter of 2016, Spirit Lake rose more than 30 feet. In November 2025, the USGS published a modeling study of exactly what would happen in hypothetical breaches of that blockage, tracking how erodible sediment in the upper North Fork Toutle would feed and amplify a downstream debris flow. And in 2026, the Forest Service moved to a final environmental impact statement on a long-term fix, stating plainly that the volcanic, geologic, hydrologic, and seismic hazards in that area increase the potential for a breach of the debris blockage or a failure of the tunnel, putting downstream communities at risk of a catastrophic mud flow. So let us resolve this honestly. Mount St. Helens is not about to erupt. The alert level is normal, the aviation color code is green, every volcano in the Cascade Range is at background, and the earthquakes that generated the headlines were almost all too small for a human being standing on the crater rim to feel. What the instruments are recording is a magma system slowly repressurizing miles below sea level in a pattern this volcano has produced repeatedly across the last 4 decades without erupting once because of it. Scientists cannot predict eruptions, and nobody at the USGS is claiming to. The mountain is doing what an active volcano does when it is alive but quiet. But that is exactly why the real danger here is not the one in the title. The realistic near-term threat at Mount St. Helens is not magma at all. It is the 1980 eruption, still moving. It is 3.3 billion cubic yards of loose debris sitting in a valley above 50,000 plus people in Longview, Kelso, Castle Rock, and Toutle. It is a 37-year-old dam that has flipped from catching 80% of that debris to passing 80% of it. It is a 1.6-mile emergency tunnel from 1985, squeezed by 12 faults holding back a 2,200-acre lake that has to be shut down and repaired every time the mountain's slow geology bends it out of shape. The volcano made its move 46 years ago. The valley below it is still absorbing the consequences, and the engineering that protects those towns is aging faster than the hazard is fading. So tell me in the comments, have you ever felt an earthquake or lived through an ash fall or watched a river rise where it never should have? I read these. If this was useful, hit that like button, let us get to 5,000, and subscribe so you catch the next one the moment it matters. See you in the next one.